Do you know what happens when a police officer breaks the hand of the most famous musician in America and does not even bother to look up at the marquee to see whose hand he just shattered? Friday, August 26, 1958, approximately 11:41 in the evening. Birdland, the most legendary jazz club on the face of the earth, corner of Broadway and 52nd Street, Midtown Manhattan. The air smelled of August heat rising off asphalt, cigarette smoke curling from the open doors of after-hours joints, and that particular New York summer perfume of gasoline, garbage, and possibility. The neon sign above the entrance buzzed and flickered, casting a wash of electric blue across the sidewalk where approximately 50 people milled about in the warm night, some waiting for taxicabs, some finishing cigarettes, some simply lingering in the afterglow of what everyone inside agreed had been one of the finest sets Miles Davis had ever played. And Miles Davis, 32 years old, stood at the curb in a coal-black Italian suit that had cost him $400, custom-tailored in Rome, single-breasted, with lapels so sharp they could cut glass, a white shirt so bright it seemed to generate its own light under the neon, French cuffs fastened with silver links, and shoes handmade from calfskin that reflected the Broadway streetlights like twin dark mirrors. His right hand, the hand that 90 seconds earlier had held a trumpet while 600 people rose to their feet in ovation, now rested gently on the elbow of a tall blonde woman he was escorting to a taxicab. He was relaxed. He was smiling. His album, Kind of Blue, which would become the best-selling jazz record in history, was less than a year from release, and the music already lived inside him like a second pulse. At this precise moment, Miles Davis stood at the absolute summit of American music, and the warm Broadway night stretched before him like an open road. 90 seconds. That is how long his white shirt stayed white. If you enjoy stories like this one, do not forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell so you never miss our next video. Patrolman Gerald Kilduff materialized from the crowd the way a shark materializes from dark water, suddenly, silently, and with purpose that had nothing to do with law enforcement and everything to do with what he saw. What Gerald Kilduff saw at 11:42 on a Friday night in Midtown Manhattan was exactly one thing: black fingers resting on a white elbow. He did not see the marquee above the door where the name Miles Davis glowed in letters 12 inches tall. He did not see the Italian suit or the silver cufflinks or the calfskin shoes. He did not see the most celebrated musician in America. He saw a black man touching a white woman, and that was enough. Kilduff was 26 years old, built like a fire hydrant, with a neck so thick his uniform collar looked like it was strangling him, and the standard-issue nightstick, 26 inches of seasoned hickory, already in his right hand when he closed the distance. There was no warning, no "move along," no "step away from the lady," no identification, no badge number, no recitation of any law being broken, because no law was being broken. There was only the nightstick and the distance closing, and then the sound. The first blow caught Miles Davis above the left eyebrow. The skin split open like wet paper, and blood, loss of it, immediate and shocking, sheeted down the left side of his face and onto the white shirt, turning the bright fabric crimson in a spreading stain that looked, under the neon, almost black. Davis staggered. The blonde woman screamed. The crowd on the sidewalk froze. And before Miles Davis could raise his hands, before he could speak, before he could do anything except exist as a black man bleeding on a Broadway sidewalk, the second blow came. The second blow hit his right hand. His right hand, the hand that held the trumpet, the hand that had just made 600 people weep with beauty, the hand that contained in its bones and tendons and muscle memory the future of American music. The hickory nightstick came down on the metacarpal bones with a sound that witnesses 30 feet away would later describe in identical terms: dry, like a branch snapping, like kindling cracking under a boot, a small sound for such a large destruction. Miles Davis, the man whose music would define the 20th century, dropped to his knees on the sidewalk in front of his own club. Blood from the gash above his eye dripped onto the concrete. His right hand hung at an angle that hands are not supposed to hang, and Officer Gerald Kilduff, without a word, without a flicker of recognition, snapped handcuffs onto the wrists of the most famous jazz musician alive, hauled him to his feet, and shoved him toward the patrol car. He did not look up at the marquee, not once, not ever. A photographer, one account says Robert Frank, another says an unnamed stringer for the Associated Press, had been smoking a cigarette by the entrance when the commotion started. He raised his camera. One click, one frame, Miles Davis on his knees, blood on his face, handcuffs on a broken hand, and behind the officer who had just shattered his future, the marquee, Miles Davis, in letters a foot tall, glowing red. That photograph would reach every newsroom in New York by morning, but more importantly, far more importantly, it would reach the back room of a barber shop on 130th Street, where it would be studied by a man whose name made police captains go pale. And that man would smile. But before we go any further, remember one thing. In this story, there is a moment that almost no one knows about. A moment in the back room of a barber shop on 130th Street when Bumpy Johnson spoke 9 words, quietly, looking into the eyes of the one man he trusted above all others, the light of a single lamp, the smell of coffee brewed at dawn. 9 words that explain everything. Why Bumpy did what he did, why he did it exactly the way he did it, and why this story became a legend that all of Harlem still whispers to this day. Those 9 words are the most important part of everything you will hear today. But we will get to them at the very end, because to truly understand them, you need to walk the entire road first. And that road began with a photograph that would set Harlem on fire by sunrise. The printing presses of the Amsterdam News and the New York Age thundered to life at 5:45, Saturday morning, August 27th, 1958, and by 6:15 the first bundles hit the newsstands along Lenox Avenue. The front page carried one image, that image, Miles Davis on his knees, blood on the white shirt, handcuffs on the broken hand, the marquee burning behind the officer's shoulder. The headline was 4 words, "Is this America, Mr. Davis?" The newsboys on the corners of Lenox and 125th, 135th, 145th could not keep copies on the stands, sold out in 40 minutes. Every newsstand, every corner, every barber shop and diner and church vestibule from 110th Street to 155th Street. The photograph was everywhere, and by 8 in the morning there was not a single soul in Harlem who had not seen Miles Davis bleeding on his knees. And then the police delivered their second blow, this time to the truth. The official statement from the Midtown North Precinct arrived at 9 o'clock Saturday morning, dictated by a public information officer who had not been at Birdland and had not spoken to any witness. The statement read, "Davis resisted arrest, verbally abused the officer, and struck him with a closed fist. The charges: assault on a police officer, disorderly conduct, resisting arrest. Not one word about the broken hand. Not one word about the nightstick. Not one word about the gash above the eye that required 14 stitches. Not one word about the fact that the assault consisted of a black man pulling his arm away when a white officer grabbed him without cause. They broke his hand, and they charged him. They split his head open, and they called him the criminal. Harlem detonated. Not physically, not yet, but the detonation was real, and it was massive, and it moved through the neighborhood like a shock wave through water. Pastors held up the photograph from their pulpits during morning services and asked their congregations to look at it, really look at it, and tell them what they saw. Black radio stations broadcast the news every 15 minutes, and between broadcasts, callers phoned in with stories of their own encounters with the Midtown North Precinct, their own nightstick wounds, their own false charges. On the corner of 125th Street and 7th Avenue, a crowd gathered spontaneously, 200, then 300, then 400 people, and the air itself seemed to thicken with a collective fury that had been building for decades and had finally found its photograph, its symbol, its proof. Bumpy Johnson was a man who weighed every word the way a jeweler weighs gold. In 30 years in the world he inhabited, the people closest to him could count on the fingers of one hand the moments when he said something that changed the expressions on people's faces. One of those moments, the most important one, is still ahead. But at 4:11 in the morning on August 27th, he spoke different words, 7 of them, and they were only the beginning, because the real threat was not coming from the street. It was not coming from the angry crowds or the outraged pastors or the civil rights leaders drafting press releases. The real threat was coming from a man who had received a phone call at 4:11 in the morning, listened to every detail in perfect silence, and then spoke 7 words that made the caller's blood run cold. Let us rewind. Saturday, 4:11 a.m., 2 hours before the newspapers. An apartment on Sugar Hill, 153rd Street, the most exclusive black neighborhood in New York. Darkness. On the nightstand, a volume of Shakespeare, Othello, open to the 3rd act. Ellsworth Raymond Bumpy Johnson, 62 years old, lay in bed with his eyes closed, but his mind running at full speed, the way it always ran, even in sleep. He was a large man, heavy through the chest and shoulders, with temples going silver and a scar above his left eyebrow, a souvenir from a street war 3 decades past that he wore without vanity and without shame, the way a soldier wears a campaign ribbon. He had only recently returned to Harlem after 11 years in federal prison, Alcatraz, then Leavenworth, and he was rebuilding his power base with the patience of a man who understood that empires built on haste crumble faster than empires built on fear. He needed a reason to demonstrate to every corner of Harlem, to every ally and every enemy, that Bumpy Johnson was back, that the old rules still applied, that there were lines that could not be crossed. The phone rang. Bumpy picked it up on the 2nd ring. He never allowed a phone to ring 3 times. Junius Griffin, an old acquaintance from the jazz world who had been inside Birdland that night, who had watched the whole thing from 15 feet away, who still had Miles Davis's blood on his own shirt cuff from trying to help, spoke for 4 minutes and 20 seconds without interruption. His voice shook. Broken hand, blood, handcuffs, precinct booking, charges filed. Davis in a holding cell with common drunks and pickpockets while his hand swelled to twice its normal size. 4 minutes and 20 seconds, and Bumpy Johnson listened like a stone wall. No questions, no exclamations, no sharp intake of breath, nothing. Silence so complete that Griffin twice asked if he was still on the line. Then, a sound Griffin did not expect. Laughter, quiet, short, from the throat. Not the laughter of a man who finds something funny, the laughter of a man who has just been handed exactly what he needed. And 7 words. They do not know what they just did. Click. The receiver settled into the cradle. Griffin stood in a phone booth on 52nd Street, holding a deadline, and felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. Not from fear for himself, from fear for those who would discover, within 24 hours, what it meant to anger Bumpy Johnson. Remember those 9 words I mentioned at the beginning? It was precisely at this moment, at 4:16 in the morning, in the darkness of the bedroom, with the cooling telephone receiver in his hand, that they were born inside Bumpy Johnson's mind. He had not yet spoken them aloud, but they already existed. Now, let us return to what he did next, because the plan that was born on that kitchen table turned out to be more devastating than any weapon. Bumpy did not go back to bed. He rose, put on a robe, walked to the kitchen, and brewed coffee. He sat at the table with a notepad and a pencil, the same kind of cheap yellow notepad he had used for 30 years, the same kind of stub pencil he preferred because it forced him to write small, to compress, to distill every thought to its essence. By the time the first copies of the Amsterdam News were rolling off the presses 6 blocks south, Bumpy Johnson had filled 7 pages. Not a plan for a riot, not a plan for blood, something far, far worse. A plan that would make an entire police precinct beg for mercy, and it would require not a single bullet, not a single fist, not a single drop of blood, only a telephone, a notepad, and a network of connections that Bumpy had been weaving for 3 decades. Saturday, 11 o'clock in the morning. The barber shop of Babs on 130th Street and 7th Avenue. Behind a curtain of burgundy velvet, the back room, roughly the size of a living room, smelling of aftershave lotion, hot hair oil, and strong coffee. 23 people packed into the space. Bumpy sat in the single barber's chair, swiveled to face the room, and before him on the fold-down tray lay 2 items. The newspaper with the photograph of Miles Davis bleeding on his knees, and the yellow notepad covered in his tight, compressed handwriting. He looked around the room and named every person present. 3 attorneys, including Cecil Moore, one of Harlem's fiercest civil rights lawyers, who had canceled a Saturday appointment and driven uptown the moment he received the call. Congressman Adam Clayton Powell, Jr., the only black representative from New York in the United States Congress who had come in person, not sent an aide, not called, but physically walked through the door of a barber shop on 130th Street, because when Bumpy Johnson asks you to come, you come. The owners of 14 of Harlem's largest businesses, restaurants, funeral homes, insurance offices, real estate firms, nightclubs, representing a combined economic force that touched every household in the neighborhood. 3 pastors whose congregations totaled 12,000 souls. The editors of 2 newspapers, 2 union leaders. And 4 men, whose names nobody spoke aloud, men who controlled an information network that penetrated every alley, every basement, every back door from 110th to 155th Street, a web of eyes and ears and whispers that made the police department's informant system look like a children's game. Bumpy did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. He opened the notepad and laid out 5 directions of attack, and as he spoke, every person in that room understood that they were witnessing something that had never been attempted before. The first finger, legal. The attorneys would file 16 complaints simultaneously with the mayor's office, the district attorney, and the Department of Internal Affairs. 17 witnesses from the sidewalk in front of Birdland had already given notarized statements. 6 additional victims of the same precinct would add their complaints. An avalanche of paper that would bury the precinct's administrative staff for weeks. The second finger, informational. The newspapers would publish a complete dossier on Officer Kilduff. 14 complaints of excessive force in 3 years, 8 from black detainees, not one investigated, not one leading to discipline. This dossier would be transmitted to every national newspaper, every wire service, every radio station. The photograph of Davis would be mailed to every newsroom in the country. The third finger, economic. Not one black-owned business within 20 blocks of the precinct would serve a police officer. Not one informant would make contact. Not one witness would cooperate on any case, not just cases related to Davis, but any case at all. Burglaries, assaults, narcotics. The precinct's clearance rate would drop to 0 overnight. The fourth finger, political. Congressman Powell would make a statement from Washington. The pastors would organize a silent prayer vigil in front of the precinct. The unions would threaten a sympathy strike of service workers, sanitation, maintenance, municipal cleaning crews, and the fifth finger. And here Bumpy leaned forward in the barber's chair, and his voice dropped to a murmur so low that only the people in the front row could hear him clearly, and everyone else leaned in, because when Bumpy Johnson whispers, "You lean in or you miss it," the fifth finger was personal, compromising material, 30 years of collection, every officer, every detective, every captain, every sergeant who had ever worked a shift in or around the Midtown North Precinct, who took bribes, who visited women who were not their wives, who planted evidence, who shook down shopkeepers, all documented, all photographed, all dated and filed and ready to be delivered to the press with a single phone call, 5 fingers, closing into a fist. That officer broke the hand that holds the trumpet. In 24 hours, I will break the entire precinct. Not with fists, not with bullets. I will squeeze them so tight they will crawl to me on their own. And then we will talk. Silence. Behind the curtain, through the wall, the sound of the barber's scissors clicking. Nothing else. 23 people held their breath. Bumpy's finger, thick, with a neatly trimmed nail, the same finger that turned the pages of Shakespeare every night, moved slowly across the newspaper photograph, across the blood on the white shirt, across the broken hand. 23 pairs of eyes followed that finger and understood. This was not anger. This was architecture. He set the deadline. 24 hours. Not a week, not a month. 24 hours from the end of this meeting. The clock started at noon on Saturday, August 27th. By noon on Sunday, August 28th, the Midtown North Precinct would either meet the conditions or learn what happens when Bumpy Johnson decides to destroy something that stands in his way. Miles Davis lay at that very moment in St. Luke's Hospital with his hand in a cast and 14 stitches above his eye, staring at the ceiling of a wardroom. He did not know that 80 blocks to the north, in the back room of a barber shop, a man with a scar above his eyebrow carried 9 words inside himself, hard as granite, and was waiting only for the plan to gain momentum before speaking them aloud. And the plan gained momentum at exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when Harlem simultaneously went deaf, blind, and mute. The first blow landed not with a fist, but with silence. At 3 o'clock Saturday afternoon, 21 hours remaining on the countdown, 64 police informants in Harlem stopped responding. All of them, simultaneously, as if someone had pulled a plug from a wall. Phones rang. No one answered. Detectives drove to known addresses, doors locked, shades drawn, no response to knocking. People who had been selling information about their neighbors and associates for $20 a tip. People who had been reliable sources for years. people whose cooperation the precinct depended on for every arrest, every investigation, every conviction. All of them, every single one, went silent at 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon with a synchronization that could not possibly be coincidental. By 5 in the evening, 19 hours remaining, the three attorneys filed 16 complaints simultaneously, 17 notarized witness statements. The legal blizzard hit the mayor's desk, the DA's desk, and the internal affairs desk at the same moment, and every complaint demanded an immediate investigation, an immediate suspension of the officer involved, and an immediate public accounting. Simultaneously, 14 businesses within 20 blocks of the precinct hung identical signs in their windows. Police officers not served. Diners, laundromats, pharmacies, newsstands, shoeshine stands, barbershops, all at once, all bearing the same hand-lettered sign, as if a single hand had written them all, which, in a sense, it had. Patrolmen walked their beats and discovered a world that had turned its back. No free coffee, no free sandwiches, no friendly nod from the shopkeeper on the corner, no tip from the newsboy, no casual conversation with the shoeshine man. They walked down streets they had walked 1,000 times and found that every face was turned away, every door was closed, every eye looked through them as if the blue uniform had become invisible. A patrolman approached the coffee shop on the corner of 128th and Lenox, pulled the door, locked, knocked, silence. Through the glass he could see people sitting at tables with steaming cups. They looked through him, literally through him, as if the sidewalk behind him were empty. He knocked again. Nothing. For the first time in his life, a police officer in uniform understood what it felt like to be invisible. By 10 in the evening, 14 hours remaining, Captain William McGovern of the Midtown North Precinct had received his 17th phone call of the day. This one was from City Hall. This one was not polite. The voice on the other end informed him that his precinct had failed to make a single arrest during the entire shift, not because there was no crime, because there was no information, no witnesses, no calls, no cooperation of any kind. The neighborhood had switched off like a light, and right now, at this very second, as the first finger of Bumpy's fist closed and the neighborhood sank into silence, those 9 words crossed from thought into decision. Bumpy had not yet spoken them aloud. That would happen in a few hours, at dawn on Sunday, in that same barber shop. And when it happened, Junius Griffin, a man who had lived through the street wars of the 1930s, who had seen men eliminated over a $50 debt, who believed that nothing on earth could surprise him anymore, would step back and lower his eyes, not from fear, from understanding. What exactly did Bumpy say? Soon. But first, the Sunday newspapers, because what McGovern would see in the morning would break him faster than any nightstick. But this was only the silence, the first finger of 5. McGovern did not yet know that in the Sunday papers, the photographs waiting for him would not be of Miles Davis. They would be of his own officers, and one photograph would be of himself. Sunday morning, 6 o'clock, 6 hours remaining. Captain William McGovern had not slept. His desk looked like a disaster zone, reporters stacked on reporters, phone messages piled in drifts, the ashtray overflowing with the remains of a pack and a half of Lucky Strikes smoked down to the filters in a single night. His eyes burned. His collar was open. His tie hung loose like a noose that had not quite done its job. The fluorescent light above his desk flickered with a faint electrical hum that sounded at this hour like the buzzing of flies. And then Sergeant Doyle knocked on the door and dropped the Sunday papers on his desk, and the world that Captain William McGovern had spent 25 years building collapsed in the time it took him to read a headline. The Amsterdam News, 3 full pages. Page 1, the photograph. The photograph that by now had been reprinted so many times it had become less an image and more an icon. Miles Davis on his knees, blood on white, handcuffs on broken bones, the marquee glowing behind the officer's shoulder like an indictment written in neon. Page 2, the dossier on Officer Gerald Kilduff, 14 complaints of excessive force in 3 years. 8 from black detainees, names, dates, incident numbers, injuries sustained, and beside each complaint, in bold type, 2 words, not investigated. 14 times, 14 complaints. 14 times the precinct had looked at a black man's bruises and shrugged. Page 3, an interview with Congressman Adam Clayton Powell, Jr., who called the incident a symbol of the systemic racism embedded in the New York Police Department and promised, not threatened, promised, the way a man promises who has the power to deliver, to raise the matter on the floor of the United States Congress. By 8 in the morning, the New York Post and the Daily News had reprinted the dossier. By 10, the story was on the Associated Press wire, moving across the country at the speed of a teletype machine, and newsrooms from Chicago to Los Angeles were pulling it off the wire and setting it in type. 3 television stations dispatched camera crews to the precinct. Radio station WNBC broadcast interviews with sidewalk witnesses, and McGovern, standing at his office window, looked down at the growing crowd of reporters on the sidewalk below and understood, with the cold clarity of a man watching his own house burn, that he was surrounded. But there was more. There was the blow he had not anticipated, the finger he had not seen coming, the move that proved, though he did not yet know who was behind it, that whoever was orchestrating this campaign thought 7 moves ahead. The Union of Municipal Service Workers announced a sympathy action. Sanitation workers in the precinct's district suspended garbage collection in solidarity with Miles Davis and in protest of police brutality. Street cleaning ceased. Maintenance crews did not report. And in front of the precinct, on the sidewalk, where the camera crews were already assembled, 120 parishioners from 3 churches materialized at 9 o'clock in their Sunday finest, suits pressed, hats on, Bibles in hand, and stood in absolute silence. They did not chant. They did not carry signs. They did not shout or sing or pray aloud. They simply stood and watched. Every officer who entered the building walked through a corridor of silent, staring, impeccably dressed black faces holding the Word of God. And not one of those faces showed anger, and not one showed fear, and that was somehow worse than any riot. Because anger can be met with force, but silence can only be met with more silence, and the police had no silence to offer. And somewhere in Harlem, Bumpy Johnson smiled that smile, the same smile that Junius Griffin would see once more 3 hours later at dawn in the barber shop on 130th Street, when he would hear 9 words that would steal the breath from his lungs. But right now, McGovern had no time for smiles. He had 1 hour and no way out. 11 o'clock, Sunday morning, 1 hour remaining on Bumpy Johnson's deadline. A courier, a boy of perhaps 16, in a clean white shirt and pressed trousers, looking like he was on his way to church, walked into the precinct, approached the desk sergeant, placed a manila envelope on the counter, said, "For Captain McGovern, sir," and walked out before anyone thought to stop him. The desk sergeant carried it upstairs. McGovern opened it with his thumb because he could not find the letter opener under the avalanche of paper on his desk. 4 photographs, black and white, shot with a telephoto lens, sharp as surgical instruments. Photograph 1, Officer Gerald Kilduff, accepting an envelope of cash from the hand of a known bookmaker named Abe Relis Jr. on the corner of 8th Avenue and 49th Street. Date stamped in white ink on the border, March 14, 1958. Photograph 2. Detective Francis Sullivan exiting an apartment on West 46th Street at 2:17 in the morning, an apartment that belonged to a woman who was not his wife, a woman whose husband happened to be a city councilman with a famously short temper. Photograph 3. Sergeant Thomas Donnelly in an interrogation room at the precinct, his back to the one-way mirror, his right hand clearly, unmistakably, undeniably, sliding a small paper packet into the jacket pocket of a handcuffed detainee. Planting evidence, caught on camera, through the precinct's own mirror. Photograph 4. Captain William McGovern himself, shaking hands and sharing a laugh with Vincent Vinny the Chin Gigante outside a restaurant in Little Italy. Gigante, a known organized crime figure. McGovern, a captain of police, shaking hands, smiling. The date stamp read June 2, 1958, less than 3 months ago. A note accompanied the photographs. One sentence, typed on plain paper with no letterhead, no signature, no fingerprints. You have 1 hour. After that, every newspaper gets copies. McGovern's hands trembled. He recognized himself on the 4th photograph, and the recognition hit him like a physical blow. A sensation of falling, of the floor dropping away, of 25 years of career and pension and reputation dissolving like salt in hot water. He reached for the telephone to call his superior, Deputy Commissioner Haynes, and dialed with fingers that would not stay steady. The phone rang 4 times. 5, 6. Haynes picked up on the 7th ring, and his voice sounded the way McGovern's hands felt, shaking, thin, stripped of authority, because Haynes had received his own envelope, delivered to his home, by a different courier, containing different photographs. That was the most expensive mistake in Gerald Kilduff's entire life. Because in the next 60 minutes, everything would change in ways that no one at the Midtown North Precinct could have predicted. And the man who set it all in motion was sitting in a barber's chair 80 blocks north, drinking coffee, reading the Sunday paper, and waiting. 40 minutes remaining. Sunday, 11:20 in the morning. Officer Gerald Kilduff sat in his kitchen in Queens in his undershirt, drinking his second beer of the morning, though it was not yet noon, though he was technically on duty, though the beer was warm because he had forgotten to close the refrigerator. And he did not know that his life had already ended. Not his physical life, the other one, the one that mattered to a man like Kilduff, the life of authority, of the badge, of the nightstick, of the power to stand over another human being and feel like a king. The phone rang. It was the wife of his partner. She was crying. She said, "Jerry, did you see the paper?" Kilduff had not seen the paper. He told her to calm down. He told her it was probably nothing. He hung up, walked to the front door, picked up the Sunday Daily News from the mat, and opened it at the kitchen table. The beer in his right hand, the hand that had swung the nightstick, the hand that had broken Miles Davis's future, stopped halfway to his mouth and stayed there, suspended, because the face looking back at him from the newspaper page was his own. His name, his photograph, a departmental headshot. How had they gotten it? His shield number, and 14 complaints, every single one, listed with dates, names of complainants, descriptions of injuries, and beside each one the same 2 words in bold, "Not investigated." 3 years of hitting people with a nightstick and feeling untouchable. 14 times someone had filed a formal complaint, and 14 times the complaint had vanished into a filing cabinet and died. And now all 14 were alive again, resurrected on newsprint, laid out beside the photograph of Miles Davis on his knees, and the juxtaposition told a story that needed no editorial comment. Here is the man who hits, and here are all the people he has hit, and here is the proof that no one ever cared. The phone rang again. The precinct. Do not come in. You are suspended pending investigation. He called the police union. They said, "We cannot protect you, Jerry. This is too public." He called his attorney. The attorney said, 14 complaints, Jerry. 14. He called McGovern. McGovern did not answer. The most powerful man Gerald Kilduff knew, the captain of his precinct, the man who had made all 14 complaints disappear, was not picking up his phone. Because McGovern was staring at his own photograph on his own desk and calculating how many years of prison a handshake with Vinny the Chin could cost him. The hunter was now the hunted. The man with the nightstick who had stood over Miles Davis 36 hours ago, who had felt the thrill of absolute power that comes from hitting someone who cannot hit back, sat alone in a kitchen in Queens and understood that no one would protect him. Not the union, not the captain, not the system. The system was trying to save itself, and saving itself meant cutting him loose, like dead weight from a sinking ship. You know what is funny? He did not even look at the marquee, broke the hand of the greatest musician in America, and did not bother to find out who he was hitting. And now all of America knows who Gerald Kilduff is. One of Bumpy's people said it, and in that sentence there was a symmetry that Bumpy, the reader of Shakespeare, would have appreciated more than anyone. The man who refused to look was now being looked at by the entire nation. But Kilduff was a small fish, a pawn, a nightstick with legs. Bumpy was aiming higher, much higher. At 11:35, 25 minutes before the deadline, a black sedan with no markings pulled up to the barber shop on 130th Street. The engine idled. The driver stayed behind the wheel. From the back seat emerged a man in civilian clothes who had never in his life set foot in Harlem, a man whose shoes were too polished and whose overcoat was too expensive for 130th Street in August, a man whose discomfort was visible in every step he took from the curb to the door. His name was Richard Hanley. He was 48 years old, an Irish career bureaucrat, the deputy commissioner for public affairs, and he had been sent by the commissioner of police himself. He was walking into a barber shop to request a meeting. The hunter was walking toward the prey, and both of them knew the roles had reversed. Noon on Sunday. Bumpy's deadline had expired, and at this exact moment, Bumpy Johnson sat in the barber's chair on 130th Street, and on his face was that smile, calm, quiet, dangerous, because he knew what was about to happen. He had known since 4 a.m. on Saturday, when 9 words were born inside his head. 9 words that you will learn in just a few minutes, because we have almost arrived. But first, the negotiation. First, the surrender. Hanley walked through the barber shop and passed through the burgundy velvet curtain and found 20 pairs of eyes aimed at him like gun barrels. He swallowed. Bumpy did not rise from the barber's chair. He did not extend his hand. He did not smile. He simply looked at Hanley the way a man looks at a document he is about to sign, with calm, evaluative patience, and said, "Not here. The church. The Abyssinian Baptist Church on 138th Street. Bumpy's territory. Not a precinct. Not City Hall. A church." The symbolism was precise and deliberate. This was holy ground, and what was about to happen here was closer to confession than negotiation. Hanley entered the church at 12:30. Bumpy was already seated on the first pew, his back to the entrance, and he did not turn around. The stained glass windows threw colored light across the stone floor. in patterns of red, gold, and deep blue. Dust danced in the shafts of sunlight. The silence was immense, the silence of a space built to hold the voice of God, now holding only the sound of Hanley's shoes on the stone floor as he walked down the aisle and sat beside a man who terrified him. Hanley began to speak, carefully, diplomatically, in the fluid, bureaucratic language of a man who had spent 20 years saying nothing with many words. He talked about the incident. He talked about ongoing review. He talked about mutual understanding and community relations and the department's commitment to fairness. Bumpy let him talk for approximately 90 seconds. Then he raised one hand, a single gesture, palm open, fingers spread, and the flow of words stopped as if a faucet had been shut. Bumpy spoke. 5 conditions, not requests, not suggestions, not opening positions in a negotiation. Conditions. First, all charges against Miles Davis dropped, completely, permanently, publicly. Second, Officer Gerald Kilduff suspended, not temporarily, not pending review, permanently removed from active duty. Third, a public statement from the police department, not the incident is being reviewed, not mistakes may have been made. An apology, the word apology, spoken aloud, on the record, before cameras. Fourth, financial compensation to Miles Davis, not symbolic, meaningful. Fifth, an independent commission to investigate the use of force at the Midtown North precinct, with civilian oversight, with subpoena power. Hanley's face, which had been pale when he entered, turned the color of old milk. Mr. Johnson, the chief of police, cannot publicly apologize. It would set a precedent. Bumpy turned to face him, slowly, the way a cannon turret rotates toward a target. And he looked at Hanley with an expression that had made harder men than Richard Hanley lose the feeling in their legs. "Mr. Hanley," Bumpy said, and his voice was softer than silk and heavier than lead, "I have photographs in my pocket that will set a worse precedent. Tell your boss he can apologize voluntarily today, or involuntarily tomorrow after I publish everything. But tomorrow the conditions will be different. Tomorrow there will be 7 conditions, and the 7th will be his resignation." Hanley opened his mouth to respond and found that his throat had gone dry. "Tell the chief. Miles Davis was on his knees. Now it is your turn to decide who kneels next." The silence that followed filled the church the way water fills a sinking ship, rising from the floor, climbing the walls, pressing against the stained glass windows until the colored light itself seemed to tremble. A drop of sweat traced a line down Hanley's temple, leaving a shining trail on his pale Irish skin. He had come here to dictate terms. He would leave here as a courier. Griffin, standing beside Bumpy at the barbershop window and watching the black sedan finally pull away from the curb, remembered the dawn, the barbershop, and 9 words, and for the first time truly understood what Bumpy had meant. Every word. Literally, every single one. Hanley exited the church at 12:58, 28 minutes. The entire meeting had lasted 28 minutes. He walked to the sedan and sat in the back seat and did not tell the driver to move for 4 full minutes. He simply sat, staring through the windshield at 138th Street, at the church steps, at the Harlem sidewalk, where children were playing and women were carrying groceries, and an old man was selling newspapers from a folding table, and everything looked ordinary, and nothing was ordinary, and nothing would ever be ordinary again. Then he picked up the radio handset and spoke the words that the Commissioner of Police of the City of New York, a man who commanded 26,000 officers, least wanted to hear. "Sir, I recommend accepting all 5 conditions. All 5. We have no choice." silence on the other end. The kind of silence that is not empty but full of calculation, full of the sound of a career being weighed against a principle, full of the understanding that principles are expensive and careers are fragile. The silence lasted 11 seconds. Then the commissioner said one word, "Arrange it." And across the street from the church, in the window of a second-floor apartment, Bumpy Johnson drank coffee and watched the black sedan finally pull away from the curb. He was in no hurry. He knew how this would end. He had known since 4 in the morning, Sunday, August 28th, 5 o'clock in the evening, 29 hours and 19 minutes since a hickory nightstick broke the hand of Miles Davis on the sidewalk in front of Birdland. The deputy commissioner of police stood behind a podium at one police plaza, and the room was packed. Reporters from every paper in the city, camera crews from 3 networks, radio correspondents holding microphones like weapons, flashbulbs popping in staccato bursts that turned the deputy commissioner's face into a series of frozen white masks, each one more uncomfortable than the last. He read from a prepared statement. Every word cost him. You could see it in the way his jaw tightened between sentences, the way his eyes stayed fixed on the paper, because looking up meant looking into the cameras, and looking into the cameras meant looking at the future, and the future was not kind. The New York Police Department acknowledges that during the incident of August 26th at the Birdland Jazz Club, actions were taken that did not conform to departmental standards of professional conduct. The reporters leaned forward. Pencils moved across notebooks. The flashbulbs accelerated. The department extends its apologies to Mr. Davis. The word apologies, spoken aloud, on the record, before cameras. For the first time in the history of the New York Police Department, the institution was apologizing to a black man. The word hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon, visible, acrid, impossible to take back. All charges against Mr. Davis have been dropped. Officer Kilduff has been suspended from active duty pending a full investigation. A commission will be established to review use of force procedures at the Midtown North precinct with civilian participation. 5 out of 5. Every condition, every single one. Not a negotiation, not a compromise, a capitulation. Complete, unconditional, and public. That evening, Adam Clayton Powell Jr. called Bumpy from Washington. "How did you do it? In one day?" Bumpy's answer was simple, and it carried the weight of 30 years of strategy compressed into a single observation. They are used to us screaming. They know how to handle screaming. They do not know what to do with silence. Kilduff broke the hand that holds the trumpet. I broke the machine that protected Kilduff. His hand will heal. Their machine will not. In the barber shop on 130th Street, a television set with a 9-inch screen flickered with the black and white image of the deputy commissioner at the podium. 12 people watched in silence. No one cheered. No one clapped. No one said a word. Only Bumpy lifted his cup of coffee, the same gesture with which 30 print this, as promised. Davis's hand healed. He recorded the greatest album in the history of jazz. Kilduff is forgotten. McGovern is forgotten. But the rule, Bumpy's rule, is alive to this day, on these streets, in this neighborhood, and every time someone in Harlem says this is not acceptable, they are repeating Bumpy Johnson, even if they have never heard his name. The journalist is silent. The notebook stays closed. He will keep his word, but now he knows, and now you know. Bumpy Johnson passed from this world in 1968, 10 years after the incident at Birdland, quietly. At a table in Wells Restaurant on 133rd Street, with a cup of coffee in his hand and a volume of Shakespeare beside his plate, Measure for Measure opened to the third act. A man who read Shakespeare at night and broke systems by day. A man who made the New York Police Department say the one word it had never spoken: sorry. And in 1989, in an interview that few people remember, Miles Davis said one sentence: "Someone in Harlem took care of me that night. I never found out how, but my hand works, and that is all I need to know." He did not say the name. He did not need to. All of Harlem knew. All of New York knew. You can break a hand, you cannot break a rule.